So, when thinking about leadership, I think it's really important to understand what will our world be like in the future. And if I look at some of the trends that organizations operate in, that also academia operates in, then if I had to characterize that environment, it's one that's shaped by complexity and uncertainty. It's shaped by climate change and increasing digital transparency, and also an increasing societal diversity. Now, these are trends and challenges that future leaders need to address.
In the Netherlands, half the population is female, but only a quarter of the professors are female. Completely unacceptable. So there is really systematic bias in that system.
We are all a product of our system, and the system we live in is racist, is sexist, and therefore maybe I am the biggest homophobe. I have internalized a lot of homophobia. I have disgusted myself to a very high extent for being gay, and it took me a very long time to accept myself. So we all carry that within us.
People feel that they are trying to be without prejudice, but nevertheless their behavior shows that they still are hiring people that are just like them.
There's a strong gap between what organizations say or what they aspire in terms of their values, in terms of what they communicate, as opposed to what they actually do and what people see in their behavior. So that's, I guess, one of the strongest challenges to navigate, that say-do gap.
In diversity trainings, oftentimes the target is on women acting in a certain way in order to achieve a leadership position. And that in that way, leadership is traditionally very masculine, traditionally encouraged to have certain very agentic traits. But yeah, I think there's a lot of recorded research about how that often promotes this kind of assimilationist culture.
You see that women sometimes tend to copy that masculine behavior in order to be successful, to look like what's already there. And I see that men usually, and it's of course difficult to generalize because there are also always exceptions from the rule. But what I see is that a lot of men have difficulties with expressing their emotions, and we have been taught that we always need to speak up for ourselves, always have an answer, and it's not okay to be vulnerable. It's not okay to not know the answer.
There are a lot of young male researchers who now say, I do not want to become the male leader that I see in academia right now. They also would like to have a different approach to the way they see academic careers. Right now, it's very much seen as you have to be available 80 hours a week. If you do not do that, you are not a real scientist. Actually, we do see that the young male researchers now face the same problems that women have faced for years.
It's quite known that women are often not getting the same opportunities as men, and that when companies launch programs for women in leadership, women in science, whatever, immediately there is a pushback claiming that Mary Alice has received this job only due to her virtue of being a woman, rather than due to her virtue of being a great candidate, leader, manager, scientist, whatever. The problem is that by forcing diversity and inclusion plans, this can easily become some kind of bureaucratic exercise. And these kind of things only work when people actually believe in them, right? It's not so much about counting women. I mean, counting women is, the basic first step, but the fact that somebody is around doesn't necessarily mean that their experience is great.
There's a big difference in sense of belonging as it comes to men and sense of belonging as it comes to females in or women in academia. So the structures and the system is still very masculine and not based on feminine values. These are all elements that individually do not seem very big or hard to remove as an obstacle, but if you are confronted every day with small obstacles or microaggressions, as we call it in harassment terms sometimes, you're always behind and you always have to fight harder.
I've had to deal with microaggressions in the workspace a lot. And it's not a big deal, and you don't want to be the person who cries racism every time, but you also don't want to experience these microaggressions and then go home and then think, I feel really bad about what just happened to me, and I feel even worse for not speaking out about this.
With Linda Carli, we used the metaphor of the labyrinth, for women, that there's, many twists and turns and decisions and different kinds of challenges, which are more complex and difficult often for the women and for the minorities.
I kept running into the fact that even though they knew me for a long time and we had a lot of cooperation, there were barriers that were undefined to become further up, to make some progress. I found also over the years that this kind of experience that I have being a woman is even stronger for women with a different ethnicity or not native Dutch, and for men who are not native Dutch also. So minorities or different ethnicities or whatever label you put on those have problems, and it's because the leadership is so one-dimensional.
If you asked 10 people randomly in the street what is their vision of a leader, they would all have a pretty uniform picture in mind, both in terms of demographics as well as in terms of personal characteristics. Typically, it would be a white man, maybe in a suit, and it would be somebody who always has an answer to every question, who exudes confidence bordering on arrogance, who speaks more than they listen.
So we really listen when white men are speaking, and then sort of our attention gets a bit less when it's a woman speaking, and even less when it's a Black woman speaking or a woman of color. When I walk into a room, people don't tend to think like, oh, she is probably the director of this organization, or she's probably the head of the group. But often when a white man walks into the room, people will think like, oh, I think he has something important to say. He might be in charge.
What's very interesting is that people then come to the room and are looking for Professor Aleid Brouw, which is me. Aleid is a gender-neutral name. So, and they come in and they always think that I'm the secretary. And then I say, yeah, I'm looking for Professor Brouw. Yeah, that's me. And they go like, oh, really? But you are... And then they never fill out whatever I am. But apparently I am different from what they expected it to be. And I am rather round, spherical, fat. Also a word you can use. But people are always reacting negative to that. It's very, apparently you can be a female professor, but you have to be very fit looking.
In exchanging mails, when I was a coordinator of a research program, people addressed me as Professor Poorthuis. But when they saw me during a meeting, they would ask, where's Professor Poorthuis? Or address me in emails saying, Professor Poorthuis, he, assuming that I would be A, a professor, and B, a male. So those are the small things in my life that I've experienced, and that point out that we're still not letting go of the typical image of the male, white, heterosexual, middle-aged man that is the typical scientist.
I'm white, I'm man, I'm middle-aged, and as such you will probably see people like me in leadership positions. At the same time, I'm Jewish, I'm gay, I'm foreign, and you are not going to see people like me in leadership positions.
We live in a heteronormative society. So when people meet me, I often get questions about my wife or my children, and often it's no problem at all. In some situations, it's a bit like, should I tell them now? It's more interesting what happens next, right? When I say, oh, I'm married with my husband, is doing this and this, and people say, oh, okay, rather than husband, and you see awkwardness or rejection sometimes.
If you look at, for example, how often we gender people, that we only have informal language, sir and madam, that are accepted alternatives. And then I've received so many emails with sir/madam, and that slash hurts me. It's like either or, and I think, like, why can I not be both, or somewhere in between, or somewhere beyond the norm, or what we consider as normal, has become quite restricted, so to say. So if I, for example, when I started to wear nail polish in the workplace, they said that it ain't professional. But I said, but all my female colleagues wear nail polish, so why can't I? Because you're a man. And I said, but maybe I don't identify as one, or maybe I want to have a bit of both. And so I found in that moment, in my personal experience, and also now hearing all those stories from our community, that a lot of people have a very limited understanding of what professionalism is, and have a very binary outlook on what it means. So we expect this from men, we expect this from women, and it causes, because a lot of white straight men are in leadership positions, are the power, or have proximity to power.
We're talking about this, and it's a tough conversation, and it's an uncomfortable conversation. And some people are getting really tired, and other people are getting really frustrated or angry, or even they feel threatened.
And that for many leaders currently is seen as losing power, right? If they don't fill the picture and others do it, that could imply I'm losing power. It doesn't. It's just a different definition of what power means. Power means empowering others to contribute and make their voices heard.
I think it would be great if men and women were equally represented, and minorities were represented proportional to their prevalence in the populations.
It's especially about leading by example. In a perfect world, we would have leadership where everybody can feel recognized.
I want everybody to be themselves and to have a sense of belonging, and that they can really bring their true selves to work and use all the talents that they have.
What really leads positive change and what really inspires people is to have leaders who listen, who are not afraid to tell the truth instead of saying what people want to hear, who are there to connect people primarily as they lead a change forward. I think we would all benefit from leaders who have the courage to be vulnerable, who have the courage to say, I don't know, but I will find people who do know, and who are there primarily as moderators, sort of wheels of change, and not the beginning and end of that change. I would also think that we would benefit from leaders who are more like servants, and who are in a position to serve the people that they work with, or the communities that they exist in, the industries that their companies are in, and so on. Because that is when we can really embrace everything that is needed to move things forward.
Hopefully, in time, when a woman walks into a room, we'll all listen. When someone who identifies non-binary, or someone who has to use a wheelchair comes into the room, we'll all be like, let's see what this person has to say. No judgment, no bias. I think an attitude and an openness to learning is crucial. It also has to do with being willing to show like a certain level of vulnerability. I remember when I was taking a class at Leiden University, I was studying biblical Hebrew. And there was something that the professor taught me that, and I can still sort of, it's still in my mind, it left such an impression. He said, if someone asks you a question, even if you're standing in front of the group, you're the teacher, you're the one who's supposed to know it all because you're teaching this subject matter. If someone asks you a question and you don't know, please, he made us promise, please say, I don't know right now, I don't have the answer, I'm going to look it up and I'll get back to you with the answer when I find it. He said that shows real strength. It shows that you take the person asking the question seriously. It shows that you take the subject matter seriously, that you take yourself seriously as a professional, because you're not just going to stand there and think, oh, shoot, I don't have the answer. Oh, you know what? I'm probably smarter when it comes to this than they are. I'll just make something up. And I think that is such an important element, like being comfortable enough, confident enough, maybe not comfortable, confident enough to say, I don't know. If you know, please educate me. If neither of us knows, let's look it up.
We need to start with ourselves and develop self-leadership. It's not enough to have just one leader in organization or top management team. We need really people on all different levels who show initiative, who know and understand the context of their organization, and they're emerging leaders. So they take initiative, they proactive, and they help and contribute in many different ways. Leaders are successful when they're able to lead people, when they're able to motivate them. And in different cultures, we really motivate and involve and organize in different ways.
It requires leaders who are inspirational, who are integrative in the sense that they are able to integrate diversity and perspectives for better decision-making. And first and foremost, it requires leaders to build trust. Now, the next question is, what does it take leaders to do that, to achieve all of that? And I believe there's 3 meta competencies conducive to future leadership and to inclusive leadership. And they are self-reflection, empathy, and diagnostic skills. It's really about understanding as a leader, those three meta competencies, being able to embody them for building the new, right? For that openness, for inspiring to build the new, to explore, to experiment and make mistakes, to be vulnerable towards the mistakes that I make, so that others see that I'm role modeling, that everyone needs to experiment and make mistakes. All of that together builds trust. And now I'm getting back to the trends that shape our world. In a world shaped by complexity and uncertainty, trust is really the central component that helps us ultimately to achieve the second goal, which is sustained outcomes. Really an understanding of how, from a systemic and holistic perspective, we can shape the future in a sustainable way.
One is just the willingness to consider a person who is not of the expected sex or ethnicity. But the other part is the person has to be good. And so it isn't, oh, well, we'll pick this person. He or she is a minority, great, we'll give them this big position. But if they fail, it doesn't help. And so there has to be that preparation, whereby they gain the experiences and background. There has to be, mentoring and other forms of support.
Well, you need help, of course. I have great supporters and mentors. So I always talk about mentors and I talk about sponsors. Sponsors are more people that from the outside have great connections and can help you, present you to other people to move you forward in your career. That's sponsorship. And I think mentorship is also really important. So people that sit down with you, find your weaknesses, find your strengths, and help you, like from a more internal, personal perspective, help you grow.
I've been lucky enough to have female professors, women professors, I should say, and they really were mentors to me. And it really showed me that you could do that. You could become a professor as well. They acknowledged that it was really, really hard to get there, and that they are willing to say, I know what it takes to get there. I'm going to help you.
As executive coaching has been growing for recent last 2 decades, now we know that finally literature understands that executive coaching is efficient, and actually it could contribute both to individual level and organizational level outcomes. It contributes both to well-being and also personal growth and leadership development.
Yeah, so you need coaching and you need training, but if you get training because you are a female, it gives you the impression that you're not fit the way that you are. We have to focus on not fixing the women, but fixing the institutions. So institutions should look at their own policies, look at their own ways of selection, look at all their rules and regulations and the way that they select and promote.
Technology can be a great tool to connect people, for the exchange of information. It offers education that can be very accessible and very scalable in ways that was not even, conceivable 1 century ago. And these are all really, really positive things, but they do also have their pitfalls if they're just taken out of context. If we do put the human in the center of this, I think that that the technology can be a facilitator of this positive change.
Yeah, we have a special tool, which is Textio. You can put the vacancy text in that system, and it gives you feedback how feminine or masculine your text is, and how inclusive or do you attract a diverse group or not. And it gives you also suggestions to improve your text.
And sometimes it takes a bit longer time, especially when you look at a faculty board level, of course. But if you have had the agreement up front that you want to have someone from a minority background or female, then you don't stop searching until you have enough good candidates. And you can use search firms for that as well.
I think quotas is the only way to reach a more diverse group of leaders. And by doing that, over time, we will change these, hopefully, these unconscious prejudices that people have.
One of the key elements that we can focus on to, let's say, retain the women. So not only get them to the leadership positions, but also change the system and change the structures and change the culture so that women also want to stay.
So you can benchmark yourself to other companies. And if you talk, for instance, about gender diversity, you have much more data because we know how many women and men work at companies. We know where they are in the organization. We know their salaries. We can also ask them, how inclusive do you feel? Do you have a sense of belonging?
I think another thing is that when you have those kinds of communications and you are kind of receiving critical feedback, that you are, as a leader, accountable for integrating that feedback.
You have the activism from the employee. So say I work at Elsevier and I see that we call it Elsevier enabled. So for people with disabilities, they're very active and they organize events, and it will change my mindset as well about how I think about people with disability.
So some organizations approach this by educating and enabling change agents, D&I promoters, making use of employee resource groups and other activist groups. That's good. But it's not good enough. What is good enough if what change enablers do is to spread into everything that you do in your daily work. It means, redesigning existing structures, redesigning existing processes and systems and habits in your daily work. So a really conscious effort on every scale of the organization for that transition from from traditional leadership and organization to a future-oriented space of innovation and sustainability.
I don't think there are any shortcuts or anything that can really happen overnight. I think things are slowly in motion already, but it really requires a culture change. And it requires both policy, level and society level changes, as well as changes on the individual level. On one hand, if there are incentives to diversify leadership, then certainly this will push things forward. At the same time, it also starts from early education and onwards, where we become more aware of our biases.
We did lots about unconscious bias training, and I think that was a good first step. But it's very much centered on what you should not do, right? You should not have a bias. In the meantime, we actually have programs. It's more like what you should do, so kind of enforce the right behavior, so to say. And one is around psychological safety. So, for instance, am I allowed to make a mistake? Can I really count on my colleagues that they're there to support me? And that, of course, is a very crucial element for an inclusive working culture. And we also, of course, about inclusive leadership, for instance. Are you aware that that you as a manager are truly inclusive in the way you kind of manage teams and manage business units, etc.?
We have recently conducted a series of interviews with people from all computer science departments in the Netherlands. And those are exactly the topics we've been discussing. So hiring, onboarding, promotion, and so on. It's extremely important to have transparency in procedures, and transparency in promotions in particular. What seems to be important is that the rules should be known. The rules should be known in advance so that people can adjust their behavior according to those rules. What we have also seen, and so we did not ask anything about childcare or parental leave or maternity support, but those topics emerge themselves. So when you just ask people, how can the university support career of women, those topics emerge by themselves.
We have to change the construal of leadership, which we have to some extent. But as I said before, if you think that leadership is just a way to be dominant and have power over others, that's not going to particularly attract most women. Some for sure, but if it's like we need more help for the poor and children and more peace and less war, then if women would see that would be political leadership as a chance to do that, then there would be more women who would aspire to those roles.
This brings me to one of the things that I find very important when it comes to leadership and inclusion is actual commitment, and I think a level of intrinsic motivation. That's why I think we need these, I call them pioneers, these people who really feel this in their midst, that things have to be fair, and in order for things to be fair, things have to change.
We have to do a lot of self-education. I started to educate myself on color, for example, on disability, on issues with women, with generational discussions, with neurodiversity. There is so much out there to learn, and yeah, that takes a lot of time, energy, and therefore also costs money. So it takes it is a serious investment to work on diversity and inclusion as a company.
One of the key paradoxes that are just really difficult to navigate is the one between focusing on strategy and the long-term goals, and then having constantly the urgent strategic execution priorities that intervene and that prevent people from focusing on the long-term change. I guess the only way to navigate this is to ensure that that element of transition, of change, is not understood as like a disruptive revolution type of thing that fosters resistance, but that it's more one of a continuous transition process that is emotionally felt. If the change is not emotionally felt, it's not seen. If I summarize that emergent change approach, it actually implies that leaders need to become change enablers. They need to understand that change, enabling the change, means actually to build trust such that they let go of the traditioned ways of thinking about power and decision making, right? So while top leaders need to set the frame, that frame needs to be filled with emergent participation, to hearing voices of the underrepresented.
Try to be aware of the privileges that I still have being white, and how I can use my privilege to open the door for people with that experience more discrimination. For Black trans people, for example, that have a much more difficult position in our society than I do. So it's really also about reaching out, helping other people that are struggling even harder than you are, helping them further to move them forward. We also have to use the norm. I have to have a seat at the table, so to say, to change the discussion into a different direction. If I'm shouting from the sideline, they will not hear me. So I need to be in that boardroom first, and I need to conform a bit to get there. So you need to be part of it to be able to change it.
This is a change process of, I would say, the culture at work, which research has shown takes, like on average, like 8 to 10 years. So that's you cannot achieve over time. And one of the elements there is really to kind of harness the, I would say, employee activism, and at the same time also have strong structural support from the top. So what you need is I think, a multi-year strategic approach. Be very clear what you want to achieve. Have dedication to achieve that over time.
Successful organizations will differentiate themselves through a true focus on humanity, on what makes us up as a human. I mean, that makes only sense, right? It's humans that build organizations. You need to redefine your business goals and shift away a focus of profitability, like monetary, financial profitability, to a broader, more holistic picture that says something around value creation and redefining what is it that we mean by value creation.
If you want to have goals towards diversity and inclusion and equity, you have to treat it like any other goal, any other business goal that you have, so to say, or organizational goal, that you take it seriously and we really break down and operationalize what we want and how we want to get there.
Organizations that embrace diversity, they perform better financially. They perform better in the stock markets. They take better decisions. They're more innovative. They're more creative.
So for young people who want to be leaders, just start today. Start today, and what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you care about? Do you observe? Is there a problem in your life or in your community that is bothering you? If it's bothering you, is there something you can do about it? If you can, just go and do it and start today and start learning.